Hello my friends, this is Dr. Beter. Today is May 26, 1978, and this is my AUDIO LETTER number 34. The time has now come for me to take pause and to take stock of the desperate situation facing us. I have worked as hard and as faithfully as I know how to do for 5 years, and I believe I should give you my honest evaluation of the success or failure of what I have been trying to do. I am not making a career of this. Either the plans of our secret rulers for war and disaster will be stopped, or they will stop us. My 3 special topics for today are: Topic number 1, the Battle of Midway repeated in space. Topic number 2, earthquakes, weather control, and hunger in America. And topic number 3, the public confession of Dr. Beter. Topic number 1. 8 months ago tomorrow, on September 27, 1977, the United States lost the most decisive battle of the 20th century, the Battle of the Harvest Moon. Not since the early days of World War II has there been anything remotely like it in significance. Ever since the sleepy Sunday morning of December 7, 1941, the words Pearl Harbor have meant far more than the geographical location of the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy. From that day onward, Pearl Harbor has been a synonym for surprise attack of the most devastating variety. To every American who heard the chilling, unbelievable news bulletins on the radio that day, the Pearl Harbor attack still remains as a searing memory. For us, it was the beginning of a nightmare called World War II. The emotional impact of the Pearl Harbor attack still lingers on, but the full meaning of that attack was lost on most of us then, and is even less widely understood today. For it was not until 6 months later that the true significance of the Pearl Harbor attack was revealed in the decisive Battle of Midway. And by then we Americans were too preoccupied with fighting the war to stop and notice the broader meaning of particular battles. In AUDIO LETTER 14, nearly 2 years ago, I referred to the fact that just prior to the Pearl Harbor attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had taken steps to arrange for our 3 aircraft carriers based there to be absent when the Japanese attacked. And in AUDIO Book Talking Tape No. 7B, which I recorded over 2 years ago with my friend Colonel Curtis B. Dowell, Colonel Dowell tells the whole story of the treason of America's leaders in connection with the Pearl Harbor attack. There's no time to review all of that again here. It's enough to say that Pearl Harbor was held out to the Japanese as an enticing target for attack, as a ruse to get America into the war. By virtue of the Tripartite Act between Japan, Germany, and Italy, this automatically involved America in the European War as well. As a result, our secret rulers emerged from World War II in control of the formerly British oil concessions in Saudi Arabia. But returning to the Pacific, the sequence of events from the Pearl Harbor attack in December 1941 to the Battle of Midway 6 months later had a profound impact on American military strategy for decades to come. In the realm of naval strategy, the rise to dominance of the aircraft carrier was confirmed during that period in the Pacific over 35 years ago, and today the aircraft carrier is still a dominant factor in most American naval thinking. But far beyond that, those first 6 months of the Pacific War became the primitive model for an entire grand strategy for world domination that was set in motion 2 decades later in 1961. Only this time the secret strategy backfired. In June 1942, the Battle of Midway, the turning point of the Pacific War, was won by the United States, but in September 1977 the Battle of the Harvest Moon, another turning point, was lost by the United States. As World War II began, most Americans still thought of battleships as typifying naval power. We had heard about aircraft carriers, submarines, and other kinds of ships, but it was the battleship with its awesome big guns, able to pound landing beaches or other ships 20 miles away, that automatically came to mind. If we had been asked, most Americans probably would have answered that the battleship was the key to naval strength. But we the public were behind the times. A revolution was taking place in the technology of naval weaponry, and top strategists knew that the days of the battleship were already numbered thanks to the rapid emergence of effective aircraft carriers. In 1941 this turn of events was still so new that even within naval ranks it was a matter of heated debate, but at the highest levels of strategic thinking it was understood in Japan as well as in the United States. When Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese naval chief, launched the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, he used a naval force built around 6 aircraft carriers. Like all military commanders, Yamamoto knew that surprise would be the most powerful of all weapons, and every precaution was taken to ensure that it would be achieved. Long before battleships or cruisers would have been close enough to start shelling Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto's aircraft carriers began launching dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters into the first rays of dawn. And at 7:55 a.m. Honolulu time, wave after wave of Japanese aircraft swept in to attack Pearl Harbor. Not a single American fighter rose to meet the first waves of Japanese attackers because the surprise was complete. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers were caught where they lay peacefully at anchor, bottled up in the harbor, and American aircraft grouped together on the airfield as a precaution against sabotage were turned into gigantic towering bonfires, even as American pilots tried in vain to start their planes and take off. Yes, tactical surprise had been achieved at Pearl Harbor by Yamamoto, but it was Yamamoto who was surprised in the strategic sense, because just as he had used aircraft carriers for the attack, his principal targets at Pearl Harbor had been our 3 aircraft carriers based there. Falsified intelligence reports had been used to convince Yamamoto that these prize targets were there, but when Japanese aircraft swarmed over Pearl Harbor that December morning, all 3 carriers were missing. As a result, the decisive blow that Yamamoto had tried to deliver to the United States Pacific Fleet had not been achieved. But incredible carnage and terror had taken place, just the right medicine our secret rulers needed to cure American reluctance to go to war. Just 5 months later, the seriousness of the failure of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor began to make itself felt. A large Japanese task force was preparing to invade some islands in the Solomons, using powerful battleships and cruisers to cover the invasion. But the United States Navy intervened, using aircraft carriers to good advantage. The resulting Battle of the Coral Sea ruined the Japanese attack plan by turning the entire engagement into a battle between aircraft carriers. The Japanese were never able to make use of their battleships, cruisers, and landing craft, and had to withdraw. But it was the following month, June 1942, that the decisive Battle of Midway sealed Japan's fate for the rest of the war. Admiral Yamamoto launched an attack against Midway Island, an important American air and naval toehold in the South Pacific. Yamamoto's force included not only 4 aircraft carriers, but a seemingly overwhelming force of battleships, together with cruisers, destroyers, and submarines. But once again the United States Navy turned the whole thing into a battle between aircraft carriers. Under the command of Admiral Chester Nimitz, American forces built around the 3 carriers that had been deliberately saved from the Pearl Harbor surprise attacked the Japanese from an unexpected direction. In a single day, June 4, 1942, all 4 of the attacking Japanese carriers were sunk. Now the vast fleet of Japanese battleships and other vessels were robbed of their air umbrella and became useless. They couldn't get close enough to Midway to attack and had to turn away. Without their carriers they were defeated, regardless of all their seeming power otherwise. The Battle of Midway was the turning point of the Pacific War. It came only 6 months after Pearl Harbor, and the war continued with great loss of life on both sides for more than 3 years afterward. But with the Battle of Midway, the ultimate outcome of the war between Japan and the United States became only a matter of time. Because the loss of the 4 carriers sunk in the Battle of Midway broke the back of Japanese naval superiority in the Pacific. From then on, American productive capacity enabled the United States to gradually pull ahead and outstrip all Japanese capabilities, and Japan was doomed. The events from Pearl Harbor to Midway over a generation ago provided lessons that our arrogant secret rulers thought they could apply on a far bigger scale once again. By means of Pearl Harbor, they had lured an intended victim, Japan, into an attack that united the American people into support for war. Meanwhile they had held back in reserve the essential weapons of retaliation which were to enable the victim to be defeated, namely aircraft carriers. At the time, carriers were still so new as a real naval force that their true significance was lost on the public at large. But by banking everything on this new decisive technology of war, they had succeeded in destroying Japan as the planned outcome of the war. 20 years later, in 1961, a replay of the same basic strategy was set in motion by our secret rulers. This was the elaborate 2-pronged strategy for world domination, about which I have given many details beginning last September in AUDIO LETTER 26 and in other audio letters since then. The intended victim this time was to be Soviet Russia, the only military force on earth rivaling that of the Rockefeller Empire. Once again the intention was to lure the victim, Russia, into a Pearl Harbor-type attack under carefully controlled conditions. As before, the terror and carnage would be inhuman, with many millions of lives being snuffed out this time, since the attack would be nuclear. But as before, our secret rulers intended to keep in reserve a decisive ace in the hole in terms of new weapons technology with which to destroy the intended victim when the time came. In the Pacific War over 35 years ago, it was the new aircraft carrier whose umbrella determined the usefulness of almost all other weapons. Today it is space weaponry that plays the same role, and the ace in the hole our secret rulers had kept aside was the secret American moon base in Copernicus crater. Armed with beam weapons, the Copernicus base was to be an invulnerable location from which any populated spot on Earth could be put to the torch instantly and at will. But last September 1977 the whole diabolical plan backfired, as I told you in detail that month in AUDIO LETTER 26. First, on September 20, 1977, the first operational Russian killer satellite, Cosmos 929, manned and armed with charged particle beam weapons, blasted an American spy satellite into a giant fireball over the Petrozavodsk Observatory located in northern Russia. It was like the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942. for suddenly the rules of battle were undergoing a dramatic change. Only this time it was happening in reverse. This time the tables were being turned against us, not by us. Then, only a week later, the space-age equivalent of the Battle of Midway took place, out of the public eye and without any public suspicion of what was taking place. Suddenly, without explanation, the Soviet Union expelled European community fishing vessels from its northern waters, where its mammoth northern fleet is based. Then on September 27, 1977, the Battle of the Harvest Moon ended in a stunning upset. The Soviet Union had knocked out the secret American weapons base in Copernicus Crater. It was a turning point battle, no less than the Battle of Midway in World War II. Since that time, as I have chronicled for you in my tapes month to month, Soviet Russia has turned the tables against the United States militarily just as surely and just as decisively as did the United States against Japan in World War II. All-out war between Russia and America has not yet broken out, but the ultimate outcome appears to have been decided already by the turning point secret space battle of 8 months ago. In the same way, the bulk of the fighting between Japan and the United States in World War II took place after the Battle of Midway, but the turning point at Midway set the course for the remainder of the war that Japan could never reverse. Topic number 2. In the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1918, centralized control of food production and distribution, food rationing, purges, and other factors led to the horrendous Russian famine of 1919 to 1921. The vicious new masters of Russia, the Bolsheviks, who are now being expelled from Russia, used hunger as a deliberate tool for political control. The awesome and tragic effects of hunger on people were described as a lesson to all by the late P.A. Sorokin, S-O-R-O-K-I-N, the great Russian sociologist who fled Bolshevik Russia and founded the Department of Sociology at Harvard University. To all who are wise enough to care about the lessons of the Russian experience in this area, I strongly recommend Sorokin's book titled Hunger as a Factor in Human Affairs. It's available for $12.50 from the University of Florida Press, 15 Northwest Street, Gainesville, Florida, zip 32603. In my very first tape, audio book number 1, I mentioned the planned role of shortages and even starvation in America as factors in the coming depression and war. Many things have gone awry in our secret rulers' timetables since then, but the prospects for hunger in America have, if anything, increased. In recent tapes I have mentioned the weather modification role which can be played by Russian cosmospheres. Their charged particle beam weapons, when fired in a defocused mode, produce not only air blasts like those that were first heard along our east coast last December, but also electrical charges in the upper atmosphere that alter our weather patterns. Now, for the very first time, I can confirm that weather control by our own secret rulers is also far advanced as it pertains to the United States. On December 12, 1977, an article was planted in a Canadian newspaper which has been circulated very widely throughout the United States. It claimed that an electronic weather barrier had been set up by the Russians to change our weather. The alleged Russian barrier was described as running all the way from Alaska to Chile, and it was blamed for the unusually severe winter that was in progress. Here, my friends, is a perfect example of disinformation. It was designed to mislead the public, and many people have been taken in by it. There is a weather modification grid system along our shores, but it's not as described in the article, and it's not Russian. It's controlled by our own secret rulers. This grid system consists of 3 tremendous underwater cables laid along the continental shelf of our east, west, and Gulf coasts. The West Coast cable runs from Cape Cook on northwest Vancouver Island down the west coast past Baja California to a point opposite Tuxpan, Mexico. The East Coast cable runs from the tip of a peninsula at the northeast end of the Bay of Fundy, Nova Scotia, southward to a point near Jacksonville, Florida. The Gulf cable runs from a point northwest of Tampa near Buena Vista, Florida, westward to a point 77 miles due east of Corpus Christi, Texas. Each cable is powered by an underground nuclear power plant. These 3 underground nuclear power plants are located at Cape Cook, at the peninsula I described in Nova Scotia, and near Buena Vista, Florida. You may have read articles speculating that very powerful radio waves might be used to alter the weather, but that's not how the coastal grid system works. Instead, each grid cable can be made either positive or negative relative to the Earth. The nuclear power plant that feeds it acts like a giant battery, with one terminal connected to the cable, the other grounded. These 3 coastal grids combined set up electrical fields that span the continental United States, excluding Alaska, with parts of Mexico and Canada affected as well. Electric charges in the upper atmosphere move in response to these fields, producing jet stream shifts which in turn alter our weather. The process absorbs enormous amounts of power, which is provided by the 3 underground nuclear power plants that feed the grids. In the bitter winter just past, killer storms were created by weather control that was only partly due to Soviet cosmospheres. For the most part, they were caused by the coastal grids, which I am able to reveal today for the very first time. At the present time, the West Coast grid is negatively charged, while the East Coast grid is positive. But I'm informed that beginning just 6 days ago on May 20, an experiment got underway involving frequent changes in polarity of the Gulf grid. Yesterday, for example, the polarity was changed from negative to positive at 4:20 p.m. and then reversed from positive to negative again barely 7 hours later at 11:30 p.m. In light of all this, ponder the words of Merlin Williams, Director of the Federal Government's Weather Modification Office, in an interview published just yesterday, May 25, in the New York Times. A sense of urgency about improved storm warning was conveyed as he pointed to communities on the southern Florida coast as being particularly vulnerable. He said it is likely that, quote, "the kind of storms that killed only a few people in the past will kill thousands. The time is ripe for such a killer storm, and I'm afraid it could very well come this summer or fall." Unquote. These grids, my friends, are being used by our secret rulers to manipulate our weather for their own purposes. Last winter tremendous storms just happened to coincide with efforts of the gas lobby to deregulate natural gas prices, and now strange weather conditions have seriously delayed the planting of spring crops in our breadbasket areas and have caused crops to be washed away in others. What is going on now is weather warfare involving not only weather modification weapons of the Soviet Union, but also of our own secret rulers. The era of weather strategy has dawned, with America as the battleground. These secret coastal grids tend to produce regional and nationwide weather modification effects, while the Russian cosmospheres produce more concentrated localized effects. But now, with even more cosmospheres overhead than the 216 I reported to you last month, a battle royal is shaping up for control of America's weather. I cannot say who will win, but what I can say for sure is that strange weather will be widespread this summer, and perhaps even more so next winter, and the losers will be you and me, the American people. This disruption of our food supply by weather modification has already begun, reflected in skyrocketing vegetable prices at your local supermarket, but a much more dramatic disruption in those food supplies that come from our West Coast could occur at any moment. I'm referring to the effects of man-made earthquake and tidal wave disaster I first warned about a year ago in AUDIO LETTER No. 24. In that tape I gave the locations of 7 Russian fission super bombs that had been planted in deep undersea trenches around the Philippines. As I explained then, the Philippines sit like a keystone in the long arc of geological faults that ring the Pacific, the so-called Ring of Fire. A major earthquake erupting in the Philippines could work its way around the Pacific Rim and ultimately devastate America's West Coast, and that's exactly what is planned. Since I made that tape, I've also reported the planting of lower-yield undersea weapons around the Pacific and elsewhere by the Soviet Union. Many of these have been detonated, and during the past year strong earthquakes have been very frequent along the Pacific Rim, everywhere except the Philippines. What the Soviet Union has been doing, my friends, is to release tensions in the Earth's crust everywhere except around the Philippines, where the stresses are building to tremendous levels. When the time is ripe, according to Russian stress monitoring instruments in that area, the bombs around the Philippines will be set off. Soviet scientists anticipate that earthquakes and tidal waves of unprecedented proportions will be triggered as a result, and that as one result America's West Coast will be laid waste. For further details of the plan, I suggest you listen again to AUDIO LETTER 24. A few days ago a volcano in the Philippines began erupting, indicating that the stresses in that area are building up, and in the past few days the Russians have triggered strong earthquakes in the 6.5 Richter range in quick succession near Taiwan, Japan, and the Aleutians. My friends, the first major disaster in the secret geophysical war now underway lies just around the corner. Topic number 3. My friends, it's now been 5 years since my nonfiction book The Conspiracy Against the Dollar was published. The book led to appearances on countless talk shows all over America, followed by cassette tapes, and beginning 3 years ago next month, my AUDIO LETTER monthly cassette series. All of this has come as an unexpected interruption in my own professional career as a financial and legal consultant with clients worldwide, and I think it's time to take stock to evaluate what, if anything, has been accomplished, and to tell you what I have learned from these 5 years of effort. But before I do that, let me say that for nearly 5 years, from 1968 to 1973, I had been helping in the development of private international business in the Republic of Zaire in Africa, and had many projects in the works there. For me, Zaire will always be a very special place, for it was there in the bush of Africa that I came to know, to love, and to walk with our Lord Jesus Christ in a way that I cannot describe. It has to be experienced. And from this experience, a spiritual experience if I may say, I was forced to take time out. Over the years I had been learning more and more about the real causes behind the political, economic, social, and military developments of our time. My contacts at high levels of business and government had involved many dealings also with the international intelligence community, which today serves big international business as much or more than it does government or you and me. Putting it all together, I had learned that a handful of incredibly powerful men were bent on wrecking your future for their own private gain. And so I wrote the book The Conspiracy Against the Dollar. I felt you had a right to know. And it's now 5 years since I last saw Zaire. I'm still looking forward to the day when I'll be able to return once again. But today Zaire is under attack by the very forces I've been trying to expose and combat here in America. Zaire, like the United States and ultimately the entire world, is caught in the middle, ensnared in the power struggle between the rising empire of Soviet Russia and the crumbling empire of the Rockefeller cartel. The conspiracy against the dollar became a bestseller, and I found myself on local radio talk shows all around the United States as well as in Canada. Many of the facts, dates, names, events, and plans I revealed in that book were common knowledge in the corridors of real power in America and abroad. But to most members of the public at large, these things were completely new. There appeared to be a thirst for this new knowledge about the true reasons behind the strange, tortured behavior of our world today. Gradually I began to acquire more and more new sources of information in business, in government, and in intelligence, both here and abroad. There have been many whose alleged tips I have had to discard, since cross-checking has proven them to be inaccurate or even in some cases deliberately fraudulent. But there have been many others whose information has proven reliable, and who have increasingly made me their exclusive channel to you. Time and again I've been told of specific instances, which I have checked and found to be true, in which certain of my sources have given crucial information to certain well-known commentators and organizations only to be betrayed in various ways. So in one sense it's a great honor, privilege, and heavy responsibility for the Dr. Beter audio letter to serve increasingly as a source of exclusive information to you. But in a broader sense, it's a sad indictment of the many other public information channels who are now denied access to this crucial information. Is the so-called almighty dollar, which is collapsing, really what's important? Will no one who claims to serve the public really do it? In short, is there no honor left in America? As I'll explain in a few moments, my friends, these are not just rhetorical questions. They go to the very heart of our desperate condition today. Beginning nearly 2 years ago in the summer of 1976, exclusive information in my audio letter cassettes began mushrooming. The reason for this was the role played by the audio letter in the Soviet underwater missile crisis of 1976, a crisis which still has never been made public by the United States government nor by any major media commentator. Those of you who are long-time listeners to my audio letter broadcasts already know the story of the Soviet underwater missile crisis all too well. You were living through it while most of your neighbors slept on, unaware or not caring that we were teetering on the edge of nuclear war. But for my newer listeners especially, I believe a brief review is in order. This crisis with its aftermath was a major turning point for the audio letter and for the United States. On July 19, 1976, I recorded audio letter number 14. For months I had been relaying to my listeners the growing fears of key trustees of the Rockefeller-controlled major foundations that a double-cross of America's secret rulers by its allies the Soviet Russia was imminent. Those fears were not shared then by our secret rulers, but as I revealed in AUDIO LETTER No. 14, the Russian double-cross was already underway. Soviet Russia was at that time preparing for a surprise nuclear attack. Like the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Russian attack plan in the summer of 1976 was based on naval strategy. The purpose of the surprise attack that was in preparation was to be the utter destruction of the United States Navy, aside from vessels at sea, at the time of the attack. and the key weapons in the impending Russian surprise attack were to be not ICBMs or bombers, but short-range missiles with multiple nuclear warheads planted in underwater launch sites in our own territorial waters. They were being planted so close to their targets as to provide zero warning time when launched. If an attack like this were carried out, my friends, there would be no doubt about the outcome of the ensuing war, especially in view of the overwhelming Russian advantage in civil defense. The United States would ultimately lose. And so in July 1976 I made public information I had received from my intelligence sources about the underwater missiles which were then being planted by the Soviet Navy. Only 2 weeks later, on August 2, 1976, I followed up with the AUDIO letter number 15. In that broadcast I explained the naval strategy that was involved and gave the navigational coordinates of 64 Soviet underwater missiles, which by then had been planted worldwide. This was necessary because this crucial information was being blocked from reaching the Joint Chiefs of Staff by agents within our own government, and only by making it a public issue was there any hope that action would be taken. By mid-August, Canada and Great Britain became the first nations to take action to have the missiles around them removed, and by late August 1976 the United States Navy was fast at work too, pulling up Soviet missiles in our own waters. General George S. Brown, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had succeeded in urging then-President Gerald Ford to overrule Henry Kissinger and give the order for the missiles to be removed. The removal operation was completed on August 31, 1976. The very next day a letter was sent out over General Brown's signature to me and to thousands nationwide who had pressed the Pentagon for action. The letter said, in the present tense, that in effect no Russian missiles were in our waters. Many people wrongly concluded from this that there had been nothing to my charges about underwater Soviet missiles in our coastal waters. But a week later I alerted General Brown that I had begun receiving coordinates for a second round of missiles which the Russians had just begun planting. I requested a meeting with him in person to relay these coordinates, and my request was granted without delay. The meeting was arranged for 3 p.m. September 16, 1976 in General Brown's office at the Pentagon. By that date I was able to give him 48 new locations around North America, recorded on a cassette tape for his ears only. When my associate who accompanied me to the meeting handed the special tape to General Brown, the General inspected it briefly, then put it into the inside jacket pocket of his own Air Force uniform, refusing to turn it over to anyone else at that moment. And a few days later I received word that the United States Navy was again hard at work, pulling up Soviet missiles without a word to the public. The Pentagon has publicly confirmed to newspapers such as the Norfolk, Virginia Ledger-Star of September 27, 1976, and the Chicago Tribune of December 4, 1977, that my meeting with General Brown for over an hour did take place, exactly as I have told you. And in AUDIO Letter 16 for September 1976 I told my listeners many more details of those tense days on the edge of nuclear war. I also alerted my listeners that General Brown would need overwhelming public support in order to continue to do his constitutional duty to the American people. As I said then, General Brown was confronted by powerful forces within the United States government who were bent on stopping him. And sure enough, on October 17, 1976, just a month and a day after my meeting with General Brown, a vicious major media blitz was launched against him. As I revealed in AUDIO Letter 17, a fateful reversal in America's fortunes had taken place on October 1, thanks to squalid blackmail threats and intimidation of then-President Gerald Ford. Now, beginning in mid-October, General Brown found himself standing alone. Many of those who had peppered the Pentagon with demands for action 2 months earlier were somehow just a little too busy to follow up with the praise and support when it was critically needed. General Brown had gambled everything on the American people, and he had lost. In AUDIO LETTER 23 over a year ago, I revealed just how much General Brown had lost. I also warned of the possibility of personal harm to General Brown, and for months now we have seen no more of General Brown in public, as if he had been liquidated in the Russian KGB style. He has long since been replaced, to all intents and purposes, by General David Jones, a man whose similarity to General Brown begins and ends with his own Air Force uniform. General Jones has far more in common with Jimmy Carter, who broke with all tradition in order to make Jones the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Jimmy Carter wanted his own kind of man, a yes man, and now he has one. Another turning point for our nation took place a year ago. At that time the Soviet program of nuclear sabotage in the United States in preparation for war began mushrooming. As you know, I suspended the AUDIO LETTER for a period of 3 months, late May to late August 1977, in hopes of assisting in efforts nationwide to expose and stop the fast-growing sabotage campaign. But when I resumed the AUDIO LETTER with issue 25 in August, I was forced to tell you of the failure of this effort, thanks primarily to official inaction at all levels, including disbelief and unwillingness to investigate. Since that time we have seen more and more of the emerging tip of the iceberg of the unprecedented threat we face. The Russian sabotage campaign that began last spring with major dams and reservoirs has long since spread to other kinds of targets, such as bridges, major public buildings, grain elevators, refineries, and for several months now railroads, especially tank cars. But having allowed our country to fall into this desperate condition, the Federal Government is making no attempt to correct the sabotage itself. Instead, throughout the United States, intensive training programs are now secretly underway for state police and selected local law enforcement agencies to cope with a virtual breakdown of society that could be brought about by massive sabotage. It has now become a part of Operation Garden Plot, about which I first alerted my listeners nearly 3 years ago in AUDIO LETTER 2. Many other parts of the iceberg of imminent danger are also visible now besides sabotage. For example, there were the unprecedented airquakes or mystery air blasts last December through February along the East Coast and elsewhere. They were produced by Russian cosmospheres, as I've detailed in previous broadcasts. But, my friends, regardless of the issue, whether political, economic, or involving our very life and death, the reactions of the American people as a whole to the information I made public are quite different from what I would have expected when I began 5 years ago. To me, it can only be described as abnormal and suicidal. Having been made the sovereigns over the United States of America by our Constitution, we the people have forfeited that sovereignty. All we can say is, what can we do? When confronted with massive documentation of fraud by the United States Treasury concerning our gold supplies, we do not as a people respond normally or logically. Instead of forcing our alleged public servants to prove their faithful stewardship, which would be a simple matter if no fraud existed, we simply believe their self-serving lies because they speak with authority. Then we go blissfully on our way, wondering why our economy is continuing to fall apart. When confronted with the evidence of our own eyes that something is terribly wrong with our true national security, We do not demand, much less force, our so-called public servants to do anything about it. Instead, we listen to pleasant words that acts of terrorism like those overseas are not a worry here in the United States. Thus reassured, we just scratch our heads as if we had not a clue to the cause when we see grain elevators, railroad tank cars, or other targets exploding in rashes without any precedent. My friends, we the people of the United States of America have defaulted on the most glorious chance that any people in the world ever had, and the time has now come for me to confess to you that my efforts up to now appear to have failed in their original purpose. That purpose was to help enable the American people to save our beloved Republic by making public the information that could have been used to put our secret rulers in the docket and to set our government on an honest course once again. My hope was that the final collapse of the United States, together with the deaths of millions, could be and would be prevented. My hope was that, for once, an entire people would be able to raise their eyes from the manufactured distractions of the day and to look ahead, to see disaster coming, and to take actions to prevent it. That is what I had hoped would happen. But as it stands now, my friends, there is no way disaster can be prevented except by divine intervention. To those who have no faith in God, these are the words of total defeat, and total defeat is what lies in store for our secret rulers. But what of the rest of us? I'm always asked, what can I do to save my country? For those who want my answer to this question, I have to say in all honesty, you cannot save anyone or anything until and unless your own soul is saved. And that can happen only if you accept our Lord Jesus the Christ in your heart, in your mind, and in your soul. There is no other way except by Jesus' power. Only then will you be able to point yourself in the right direction. Only then will you begin to understand what needs doing. And only then will you realize that your Creator comes first, not country, not self, not anybody, but your Creator. Then will you begin to do what is right, simply because it is right. In months ahead, God willing, I hope to continue to keep you informed of events and their significance to you, just as I have been doing. But I also will try, God willing, to tell you more about what could be done to replace the evil system that is now collapsing around our ears. The Republic which was created by our Founding Fathers is no more, except for a crumbling shell. But if we, like our Founding Fathers, will commit our way into the Lord's hands, we might yet have an opportunity even greater than theirs. On the ashes of a republic that stood for 200 years, there might still be built one that would last until the end destined by our Lord. For we have not only the eternal principles that guided our Founding Fathers, but also the lessons of what went wrong with what they created. 1 year ago, in AUDIO LETTER No. 24, I used the historical precedent of the fall of Babylon to illustrate the total and imminent collapse of the United States. But we can and must pray that instead another historical precedent of long ago will take its place, that of ancient Nineveh. We are told that Nineveh, like Babylon, fell into evil practices of all kinds, and that both the leaders and the people forgot all about God. Then one day a man named Jonah began walking through the streets of Nineveh, calling to mind all the evil that was rampant in the city from top to bottom. And he warned that for turning away from God, the city would shortly be utterly destroyed. His words struck home, and both the people and the rulers of Nineveh turned aside from their ways and turned back to God. And Nineveh revived, becoming a great city once again for generations. We now face a trial by fire, my friends, and if at some point we as a people wake up and turn back to our Lord, then and only then might the remnant of our once great nation be spared. Until next month, God willing, this is Dr. Beter. Thank you, and may God bless and protect each and every one of you.